Okay, all set.
Right. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to this Sunday webinar. I don't think Patrick needs much introduction, but for those who haven't met him yet, Patrick is the CEO of the National Film and Sound Archive, and I've asked him today to present his strategic directions for the next 3 years. So, Patrick, it's over to you.
Thanks, Ray. Do we know if Bruce got back on again? Or should we kick off?
I can't see.
Well, I'll start slowly, and hopefully he'll be back on before we get into the main event. I am on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation today, and I'd like to start off by paying my respects to their elders, past and present. It's always a privilege to be on such beautiful country. Thanks for sparing some time today and inviting me along to talk as well. I have been in the role for still less than 2 years, but a lot has happened, or it seems like a lot's happened since I've been in the chair, and most of it great. And I've really been enjoying deepening my knowledge of the collection in particular, and also the institution. With me today, I have Jackie Ullman, who is our head of collection. So Jackie is kind of the boss of most things in the organisation that touch collection, including collection preservation and curatorial and accessioning. And Jackie, with her incredible depth of expertise and experience in public affairs and governance and government, in fact, also leads our governance team. So thanks, Jackie, for joining today. The team is pretty thoroughly remodeled. Jackie's only been in the organisation for about 2 years, so just beat me into NFSA. And also in place when I arrived is Rebecca Coronel, who is head of collection and preservation, and she is a very eminent practitioner of museology in the kind of Canberra NCI environment. Has worked at NMA and various other institutions, and so I was very thrilled to have those two in place when I joined. Other than that, I have remodeled the leadership team just to make it a bit more flat and to cover a few more of our strategic challenges more directly. So some of the appointments I've made recently have included a Chief Marketing Officer, Nicole McPeak, who's based in Sydney. This is a theme that you would have talked about and thought about a long time over the life of the institution, but we do need to look at earned revenue and philanthropy and audience development. And I just felt like our capacity in that regard needed a bit of turbocharging, and Nicole McPeak is one of the country's foremost audience and market development people in the arts industry. We also managed to lure across from the National Gallery Dr. Keir Winesmith as our Chief Digital Officer. Keir started his career at SBS and also did a lot of amazing work early in his career at the Museum of Contemporary Art, which got him poached by San Francisco MoMA. So he's had a career in the USA. He is on every second kind of culture and technology panel and conference you can think of, and has published books. And so we're really thrilled that he's joined the organization. We really need him at the moment because digital preservation, digital collecting, we don't just need an IT team. We need someone who really understands digital in all its facets in the cultural context. And most recently, in fact, less than 8 weeks ago, we hired a guy called Chris Mercer, who's based in Canberra in a new role called Program and Place. So his role is really to make sure that our built environment and our physical programs work together. There are a number of challenges there that you may be aware of. And Chris joins us most recently. He was already in Canberra. He and his wife are from the region, and they have 2 little kids. So they'd already moved back to Canberra. Chris had been for the past 3 years the head of cultural practice Asia Pacific for Arup, the development company, and he was one of the team at Arup that just won the Canberra Theatre Centre competition. So he knows a lot about cultural infrastructure and programming and how to bring those two things together. So we're super fortunate to have them. They're here for the same reason that I'm here, but we all think that NFSA is unbelievably valuable and precious, and none of us can quite believe how below the radar it still flies on the national level. And we'll talk about that a bit more. So the team has a lot of enthusiasm to get going on that front. The other person I should mention who's a semi-member of the senior leadership team, is Gillian Moody. Gillian is our Senior Manager of Indigenous Connections, and she was a kind of somewhat miraculous recruit for us because she has had many years experience as a screen executive, including for Screen Australia, but for the last 7 years has been an award-winning producer and director. And her most recent film is just premiering at Sydney Film Festival right now. So Jill brings incredible skills as a practitioner, and as an executive within the funding environment to our team. So that's an introduction of who's who at the moment. And what I thought I would do is take you through some slides. The strategic directions document was published earlier this year. It's been available online. Some of you may have read it. I know that some of you have because you've been in touch with me about it, which is great. So I'm going to go through the highlights of that. But interestingly, what's happened since the strategic directions document was published and now is that we got more money from the government. And so when we issued our strategic directions document, we were like, this is the most sensible, logical way that we can proceed in the next 3 years to really support the mission of the organisation and to provide more value to Australians through the organisation. We weren't entirely sure at that point how we're going to pay for any of it. So now we have the uplift in funding, which I'll talk about a bit later. We have a lot more confidence about planning into the future. So what I'll do now is I'll jump onto the slides and I'll take people through, and I'm very happy if someone wants to talk over me, like take questions at the end, or if you want to talk over me at any point or put your hand up, I'll try and read the screen. But let's just see how we go. Can we all see that? Cool.
Good.
So the Stories Archives Tell is kind of our de facto internal mission statement at the moment. It's something that we keep reminding ourselves of the power of the archive. And it's a catchy expression. It actually came out of our head of commercial and access, Bronwyn Dowdall, said this spontaneously in a meeting one day, and we all went, yeah. So we've adopted that. Just need to make sure how to get to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so this is set out in the strategic plan. We boiled down a lot of the statements that were in previous strategic documents into much clearer and shorter sentences. So we see the purpose of the National Film and Sound Archive as to tell the national story by collecting, preserving and sharing audiovisual media, which are the cultural experience platforms of our time. So in that purpose statement is almost like our theory of change. How can we not be the preeminent collecting institution in the 21st century when the 21st century is largely about digital AV, which is in our preserve. And our goal, as I just said, in the 21st century, NFSA should be the country's most distinctive and valued cultural institution. So that's the little fire that we've lit under ourselves in plain terms. It's really interesting that since we launched the strategic plan, the government now talks a lot about how NCIs tell the national story. So we either influenced that or we just struck on the same tagline at the same time. But now all the institutions are now lining up around this idea of what it means to tell the national story and to remember the national story. This doesn't need too much explaining. We're all aware of this. We operate at all times in a context of social, economic and environmental sustainability. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in each of those areas. Operating efficiently on the one hand, maximizing earned revenue on the other. And we're at the beginning of the federal government has published its ambition that government agencies should be carbon net zero by 2030. And we still don't really have any sense of what our current emissions are or how we may contribute to that target, which is going to be increasingly important for all cultural agencies. And social as well. We are paid for by the taxpayer. What are we doing for the taxpayer? The strategic plan pulls out 3 kind of overriding priorities for the next 3 years, which are reach, relevance, and revenue. And each of these have a kind of a sort of a higher purpose, if you will, and also a more base purpose. So relevance is for cultural mission. We need to make sure the collection is truly representative, that we are collecting a representative picture of contemporary Australia for the future. We also need to be mindful of how practices in the past may have left cultural and identity gaps in the collection and how we make them up. We feel like we need to do that because, as I said before, we're paid for by the taxpayer, so we need to serve and reflect contemporary Australia. But also, if we're relevant to more people, we're going to be attracting a broader range of people, and that's very key for profile building and revenue. With reach, we want to serve Australians wherever they are, not just those people who happen to be able to get to Canberra. Like the other NCIs in Canberra, the audiences that we have skew very heavily towards ACT and New South Wales. And you know, in the 21st century, dealing with digital media, we should be providing as much value to someone who lives in Albany or Toowoomba as we do to people in New South Wales and the ACT. So that's, again, I'll just look at my animal. She gets very interested in these things. So again, you know, we want to do that to serve the people who pay for us, but also the more people we serve, the bigger the audience we've got, and that becomes a bit of a self-supporting circle. And with revenue, we need to demonstrate value for public revenue, and we need to generate private revenue. And I think our main, we have under the last government, we received quite a large investment into digital preservation, and under the current government, obviously we've had the recent funding uplift. It's really important that we are constantly demonstrating value for money to government, so they never regret giving us more money, and they can see the value coming back for taxpayers. And that's one of the things that Jackie will be working on, is just maintaining those linkages across government. The collection and the story we tell, you know, we now touch 4 million items in the collection that are being preserved by us, and we're adding to that all the time. So how do we, you know, if you're explaining the collection to people, where do you start? Because it's such a massive and extensive collection. And so we're now talking about the collection in terms of identity, form, and curiosity. So identity is obviously we're the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia. So when you research through our archive, you should be getting a picture of a snapshot of Australia through the ages. We should be collecting to capture Australia as it is now for people in the future. The identity of Australia is really beautifully set out in Noel Pearson's essay, A Declaration of Australia, where he talks about the three basic eras of Australian culture, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island foundations, 19th and the 20th century European colonial and post-colonial institutions, and contemporary multiculturalism. Form is where we talk about the collection in terms of genre, maker, technology, processes, industry documents. So you might know that when we collect a film, for example, as far as possible, we want to collect the press kit and the budgets and other things that go around the artifact so that we can understand how the industry worked at that point in time. Australia is the country that invented the Fairlight music computer. So as a piece of technological advancement, that's really important on the sound front. So that's form, and also it's why we have you know, extensive collections. We've got an ongoing partnership now with Basmark, and we received an enormous amount of material from the Elvis collection, which speaks to Catherine Martin's incredible strength as a designer. So we also, under the form category, we're talking about significant practitioners of the past and the present. And curiosity is the fun stuff. It's you know, you can research NFSA as much as the National Library to get a snapshot of life in Australia over the ages. You may know that we are spending a lot of time, you know, we think audiovisual media is popular and positive and creative and great, but it's also ripe for misinformation and abuse and manipulation of people, which is why we're spending a lot of resources on developing media literacy programs centered around the collection for younger people. So the collection has all these sorts of things that we can learn from: feature films, but also advertisements, scientific and ethnographic recordings, you know, as well as comedy and sport. So curiosity is all the kind of the sort of fun stuff. But as an Australian institution, we very much are reminded of our duty to tell a national story through collecting for identity and also for form. Apologies that this is a bit small. I've got a couple of slides that just kind of join the dots, if you will. So the collection is everything. The collection is our point of departure for every conversation. And what do we do with the collection? The collection is there to tell a national story. every acquisition by the curatorial staff is an act of storytelling. We're capturing representations and images and opinions of Australians for people in the present and the future to understand. We can't really do much for people in the past, but hopefully we've already captured their stories. In the 21st century, AV is everywhere, and the natural exhibition state for motion picture and sound are headphones, speakers, and screens, and they are everywhere. So if we can be true to our own form and also true to the desires of the contemporary audience, which is it's possible to get it on my phone on the bus right now, why can't I? we need to really connect with contemporary culture, and this is one way that we'll be able to increase our reach. The other thing that is critical for us is preserving the collection, and there are challenges with that around storage, which there are for other NCIs. But there is a dual challenge for NFSA as an audiovisual institution in the 21st century, which is we have an extensive physical collection and we will continue to collect physical artifacts. Of course, we just brought in an amazing collection of magic lantern slides, 19th century and magic lanterns, incredible historical heritage physical artifacts. But a lot of the material coming into the collection now is born digital. It's not digitized from a source format, it is digital. And digital storage has its own entire range of problems, challenges, technologies, processes, which we, and to be honest, other institutions like us around the world are still grappling with. So the preservation and the storage part of our business is super complex right now, quite pricey. It's one of the reasons why it was important to get someone of Keir Wine-Smith's caliber into the organization to help us with this particular challenge. And then we need to keep acquiring, and this is where we want to lean more into relevance. You will all be aware that of the waxing and waning, and in the last decade, perhaps more waning than waxing fortunes of the institution. That I guess the crunch point was 2014-15, where the Acton site was more or less closed. We lost a third of our staff, and we've never really recovered from that. We still have half as many curators and accessioners as we did 10 years ago, but the collection size has doubled. The complexities of digital media have increased, phenomenally. And so what that's meant is increasingly we've been relying more on deliverables programs. So we're still bringing in works that are funded by state agencies in Australia and collection donations. But what we really want to see, and what we're now in the position of being able to contemplate, is really rebuilding our curatorial and accessioning workforce, because we want curators to be able to think more and to make connections in the community more, and to make sure that the material we're bringing in represents citizen makers as well as professional makers, just to name one challenge that we have at the moment. And then we have our on-site programs at Acton, our education programs. And in an ideal world over the years, we should be doing more programs elsewhere. Not everything we do needs to be at Acton just because we have the building. We're a national institution. If we're going to be doing an exhibition about 100 years of film production in Australia, why wouldn't we be doing that at QA Goma in their Cinematheque and in their exhibition halls? We're national. We should be looking at really how we partner more in each state, as well as using our headquarters better, because having a seat at the table in the national capital is of course critical, but as a national institution, and we don't have enormous freight and exhibition charges to move our material around. It can be transmitted digitally or quite readily. So over the years, this won't be part of our initial rebuild priorities, but over the years, we'd like to think that actual programs with partner institutions around the country are one way that more people will get to experience the collection. So here is some new money. A couple of years ago, end of 21, we got this $42 million grant from the previous government to ramp up digital preservation of at-risk items. So primarily magnetic tape, video and audio. And a lot of the collection is held in those forms because they're very, very popular and well-used media forms in the 20th century. There was quite a campaign around the National Archive, and they got more money, and I think our money came on the heels of that. I think that the government was well aware by that point that there were assets held by the government that were going to be lost forever. Like once these tapes are gone, if they're not backed up digitally, the content is lost forever. And so getting this $42 million investment over 4 years is critical for our mission. It's critical for the preserve part of collect, preserve and share, but it didn't necessarily fix any of our strategic problems or workforce capacity problems. Nevertheless, this slide is in the strategic directions document. And this is kind of the spine of what we are all about over the next couple of years. So we now have the money to digitize the collection for preservation. Once items exist in a digital format, they become a lot easier to search, including through artificial intelligence tools, which we are now experimenting with, so that things like, historically, catalogs are very clunky and hard to navigate for uninitiated users. But with digital items, you can design much more intuitive search tools that can run over the digitized collection. And this will really massively enhance the ability of all kinds of users to really understand what's in the collection. And every institution that I've spoken to around the world since we've started working with AI, every institution that is already working with AI, what they've said is the quickest and most incredible value they gain from artificial intelligence is they rediscover so much stuff that people had forgotten about or thought was lost. And once you can search more thoroughly, all these things, either spontaneously or through deliberate search, are once more available and visible. So that's definitely something we're focused on, that this $42 million allows us to do. And of course, the next thing is, once it's more discoverable, once you can stream it, for example, it becomes way more accessible to users across the country, and that includes our industry partners as well as just interested citizens. So this is something that we knew we had going into the strategic plan. And now we have this additional $34 million over 4 years, and then a permanent uplift of $9.7 million per year thereafter from year 5 onwards. And this is pretty game changing. The government has been very careful to say that the uplift in funding to the NCIs is so that we don't have to sack any more people or cancel any more programs. That's really important to remember. This isn't supposed to be, often with government funding, they'll say, well, if you want us to give you more, what more are you going to do? And we're like, no, you need to give us more because we've had too little and we're sacking people and stopping programs. So we need more just to stay where we are. The government, and to give the former government credit as well, the former government engaged KPMG to look into the scale of the problems of the NCI institutions. And it's the current government that's actually paid that work off. So in a sense, there's been a bilateral agreement that something had to be done about the NCIs. And it's really great that this $34 million isn't coming with a gigantic list of new expectations, because sometimes, the new funding can put you in a net worse position. But this is very much to stabilize. And to be honest, we were in a position where we were looking at how we're going to rationalize again our operations before, i.e. do less. The irony of the efficiency dividend, as it's called in the cultural space, is it doesn't make us more efficient, it makes us smaller and less productive. But what we are able to do with this money is first to rebuild workforce capacity, and as I've said, particularly in curatorial and accessioning. So Jackie and I are working with our chief curator, Gal Lake, and her team of EL1s, which are people who report to her, on role design, how we're going to quite substantially regrow this part of the business so that we can be much more strategically and proactively engaged with makers and users, whoever they are across the country, to make sure that our collecting is representative of the country. Inside the 34 million is 3 million for critical capital works. They are super boring. It's a building management system for Acton because the old one's fallen apart, and you can't operate a building these days security wise and power and all that kind of stuff without a proper building management system. It's chillers for the air conditioning because they need replacing, and it's a third thing. So this 3 million over 4 years is not, you know, an exciting redevelopment of Acton or anywhere in particular. It's end of life. You know, it's the fixer-upper moment, but nevertheless, it's good to have that money. The next things that we'll be looking at are the refurbishment of Acton and a reinvigoration of public programming at Acton. My predecessor, Jan Muller, well, before Jan was Michael Lebenstein, who was the guy who was in the position of shutting Acton, which can't have been great for anyone. Jan's vision was to turbocharge exhibitions and to build a big new building next to the National Museum and to become a much more visible Canberra exhibition destination. And when I arrived, I didn't think that vision was actually viable. And so we have decided to have another look at Acton. And that building is you know, it is a very valuable piece of heritage that NFSA has stewardship over. Like, it itself is one of the most important assets in our care. It's stunningly interesting. It is located basically on the ANU campus, right next to a new tram stop, and in this area of Canberra called City West, which is slated for redevelopment. So what we're doing is, instead of saying this building is terrible for major exhibitions, we're actually saying this building is wonderful for A, screenings in the cinema, but B, there are a whole run of rooms that are great for talks, smaller scale gatherings, classroom style activity, smaller displays and exhibits. And so it's one of the reasons we want to bring someone like Chris Mercer on board, was we do need to repair and renovate parts of the building, but we want to do it in a way that cuts with the grain of the building, and that gives us really beautiful and new opportunities to gather to talk about audiovisual culture. So those two things are now underway. The next thing that we will be pushing on is the national digital presence and tools. And so that comes back to that slide I showed you before. What that essentially means is, by the end of the first quarter of 2025, we want to look completely different online, new website, new search tools, new streaming capability, because, you know, for most Australians, the experience of the institution will be online. So we want that website to be a digital institution. It won't be there to show a couple of clips that we've picked and to advertise what's happening at Acton. It will be a full content offering. We do want to talk about a national physical presence, and I've already highlighted how that might take place. Just to get into the, you know, if we're national, let's partner with the WA Museum. Just change that thinking a bit. And we're after greater engagement with the national screen sector. So I've been spending a lot of time since I've been in the role with Screen Australia, the Film School, the head of NIDA, and the ABC. We think that we should be counted as part of the set of national screen sector institutions as much as we are counted as part of the 8 national cultural institutions. Screen and media, I should say. So we are developing relationships with IGEA, which is the games industry body. As you may know, games globally is now a larger industry than music and film combined. So it's a critical cultural force as well as industry force. And so we're just changing our organizational psychology to make sure that we don't think too much within the Canberra cultural sector, although they're critical peers for us and we have long-standing relationships with them. But, you know, we need to be talking to Screen Australia more, because the deliverables program means that whatever Screen Australia funds is coming into our collection. So we should be having more sort of, you know, creative and curatorial and philosophical conversations with Screen Australia about what they're funding. We also have a couple of projects coming up, and this is under a new strategy, which is called the editorial strategy. We've had web publishing, but one of the institutions that I've been most struck by as I've traveled the world after taking the job is INA, the Institut National de l'Audiovisuel in Paris, which is the French broadcast archive. They are charged with recording and preserving everything that goes to air on television and radio in France, which is quite a big remit. And they have 1,000 staff, and 100 of those staff work in what's called their editorial department. They are making their own content from the collection, and they have a channel on Amazon in France, which has, it's like INA in France is kind of like a media brand, like the ABC is here. And they do fascinating things, like their editorial team monitors what's happening in the daily news, and they will publish archival in conversation with the daily news, which is both interesting from a cultural viewpoint, but also educationally very strong. We're not going to have 100 people in our editorial team, but at the end of 5 years, I'd like to think there'll be 5, and we're starting with 1. And one of the first projects will be shaping the centenary of radio, centenary of commercial radio in Australia project. The curators have done a huge body of research, and we've just engaged an editorial director to understand the stories in that research and how to get them out to an audience. And so that's an exciting piece of work. And also, and Jackie will talk about this at the end of the presentation, we've got the 40th anniversary of NFSA, which we're planning on marking and celebrating in a variety of different ways between April and October next year. We only just had a board meeting this week to sign off some of the expenditure for the 40th. The elements of the 40th program will fall into next financial year. So we'll be able to, nothing, until we actually had the budget locked in, nothing is actually signed, sealed and delivered, and there will be opportunities for more types of events with partner bodies, including the Friends. And so we can talk a bit more about that at the end of this. But these are things that the $34 million enables us to confidently think about over the next 3 years. And so our vision for 2025 at the end of this strategic planning cycle is we want to be the national digital cultural institution. Our online presence, when you go to the website, should enable you to search, stream, save, and share content, allow you to support the institution. The process of offering items to the collection as a collection item donor should be a lot easier than it is now. We're already building digital tools to facilitate not only the donation part, but also the curators. In the digital age, for example, if you're given a video game that might have 15,000 separate digital files connected to it, and at the moment they just sit in our backlog because literally a curator would have to drag and drop 15,000 files into our current media asset management system because it was built for broadcast in an earlier era. So we're investing in what are called digital asset management tools. So you can just drag those 15,000 files across and they will know where to go and live in the storage system. So that's an invisible but critical part of investing in collecting. And also I want to make it easier to license and reuse the collection. We've been having a lot of conversations recently about pricing and the different types of pricing and all that kind of stuff. And someone who's been in the team for a long time said, you know why this doesn't work? It's because it was invented, this whole structure was invented 15 years ago to serve funded documentary production. The problem is what's happened in the last 15 years is that the majority of factual production in Australia is now people posting directly to YouTube. And so all of the ways that we say that we're supporting audiovisual making and audiovisual industry is kind of out of date. And that's because digital has changed everything. So we're having a lot of conversations between the commercial and licensing team and the digital team at the moment about how to understand what makers want, who makers are, what they want, and how to serve that to them in a way that we are stimulating and supporting production and consumption in the country. Also in 2025, we're not thinking about Acton and NFSA in Canberra as being the kind of, Cinderella to the National Library and the National Gallery and the National Museum. We're saying that Acton should actually be the local cultural hub. We don't want to put things on in the hope that people from Sydney and Melbourne are going to come there. We want to make Acton a cherished and busy and popular place for local Canberrans to gather. And in doing that, it will have a buzz that if you're from interstate and you come to look at an exhibit or come to a talk or a screening, you'll go, wow, this place is amazing. Look at all these people. So it's a place for us to work. It's a place for us to do preservation work. And it's a place to gather and discover around the collection. And also, as I said, since I've been in the role, I appeared at Senate estimates the week before last. It's the first time NFSA has been called to Senate estimates for a long time. And it was a really good opportunity for us to educate the senators about who we are and why we matter. And it just made me think, it just reinforced to me that actually having a physical presence in Canberra is super critical and quite exciting. And then we also, as we feel confident that all this cycle of strategic work is underway and is funded, we have a few projects that we're calling our South Star projects, because we're in the Southern Hemisphere, not the Northern Hemisphere with a North Star. And this is where we really wanted to increase our work in repatriation of content to Indigenous communities. We finally delivered this year the final part of a project with the Strello Research Centre in Alice Springs, which, for those of you who don't know about it, Strello collected from the 1930s to the 1970s all kinds of motion picture and recorded sound of the Aranda people in and around Alice Springs. A lot of the work was secret, sacred men's business. All the material came to us in the 90s for preservation because it was perishable and it was being kept in sheds in Alice. And then in recent years, we're kind of like, if we had enough money to digitize this, the entire collection could go back to country on digital servers, and community members could actually go and search through all this material. As they are revitalizing language and culture, all of a sudden they've got decades worth of resources on country that they can go and work with. We got a little bit of money from government, worked with the Australia Research Centre, and that digital studio was launched last month, I think. The value from that, like within a week, senior men had been in to review the collection. They were able to optimize poor sound recordings and hear things they hadn't heard before. They were finding things by accident. They were discovering that 2 verses of a traditional song that had in the wrong order. Huge, huge value there. That is an area of inquiry that Jill Moody is spearheading. We want our media literacy curriculum to be curriculum, not a program that happens with schools when you're in Canberra. We want to publish it, and we want it to be the best. We want it to be class leading. We want to publish it as curriculum, and we want it to be available for delivery and learning around the country. We want to talk about our national physical presence, which I've already touched on, and we want to keep pushing on technological and cultural innovation, which I think at this point in time, we are very well placed to do. So I think that's the last slide. It's a boiling down. I mean, a lot of these ideas you would have heard of from my predecessors, but I think now is the time to really realize the particular and specific opportunities we have in the 21st century, which is people love old stuff. People are curious about old stuff. You can learn from old stuff. You know, I can, you know, before I worked at NFSA, I think my favorite piece of content online was that tram going down George Street, Sydney in 1898 or whatever. I just find that mind-blowing. There's so much, whether it's nostalgia or historical discovery or just knowing more about your local neighborhood. Archival is so powerful, and there's such high levels of interest in it right now. Plus, we're an audiovisual institution, and audiovisual in the 21st century is digital. We can be everywhere. So we've got the content, we're building the capacity, and we think that the more people around the country know us and obtain value from us, the more we're actually shoring up the fortunes of the organization into future generations as well. So that's our current view. As I said, to me, it's really interesting that the collection was started in 1935. And I've kind of Googled the big European collections were starting in and around the mid-30s as well. So the Australians were early adopters of the technology and as audiences, and, you know, first narrative feature-length film, Ned Kelly, being made here more than a century ago. But also it turns out the collection was a bit of a leader as well in that period of the 20th century. And so I'm very aware that the collection and the institution is built on generation after generation of innovation and achievement. I was a bit surprised when I got into the job and realized how moribund parts of it had become only due to the fact that there was no money. The organization, even if we managed to increase our workforce over the next 3 years in the way that we are hoping to, it still won't be quite as big as it was 12 years ago. And we recently had Paul Keating on site for 2 hours, who was giving us his VHS and DVD collection. And he spent a long time with us talking through his items. So he was very aware of the importance of audiovisual heritage. but also talking about the institution. And we're able to remind him that he announced the funding for the annex in October 1994. So it's like, you're giving us material to preserve in a building that you enabled to happen. So again, it's these generations of surging ahead. We know that when I've traveled internationally, Jackie's been, we're reinvesting in our workforce, getting out internationally again on delivering conference papers. This year we sent 2, not 1, placement over to George Eastman House. We're really reinvesting in learning from our networks, but also our networks still want to learn from us. NFSA still has an exceptional reputation internationally for what it does. And while we think in Australia, oh, we're a bit behind the ball on artificial intelligence and we should be doing more of this and that, when we actually get out internationally, we realize that we might not be the most advanced as some of the major European institutions or US institutions, but we're still up there. And so we want to really encourage more action around audiovisual archiving as a cultural form. Michael Lobenstein said that a lot of audiovisual, there's no centuries of custom and practice with audiovisual archiving, like with libraries, museums, and galleries. So a lot of audiovisual institutions, some are just broadcast and some are just film and some are moving image but not sound. And NFSA is in this wonderful position of collecting everything. And one of the ways this makes us a leader internationally at the moment is we are one of the foremost major institutions talking about video game collecting. Because I went to Fiat IFTA, which is the television and broadcast archiving thing. No one quite knew, they knew games were important. They didn't quite know how to accommodate them in their missions. FIAF, no one was really talking about games at all. AMIA in the States, games were on the radar, but no institution felt like they quite owned it. There's the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, which is the same city as the George Eastman House. They're a museum of play, so they started out collecting dolls and board games, and so that's why they collect video games. And in my view, they're probably the foremost collector of games. But everyone's really interested to hear from us and interested to learn from us and talk to us more about video game collection as an audiovisual cultural development. Anyway, all these things. It's a very exciting time. We've got some money. Nothing's going to happen overnight because, as you may know, it's much easier to sack 15 people than hire 15 people. But there are some opportunities coming. And now I'm going to click stop share. And Jackie and I can take some questions. My cat got away.
Jackie, do you have something to add now?
If we have time, I was just quickly going to talk about the 40th, and I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes. And perhaps that's something we can talk to you in more detail about at a later event or later in the year. But as you know, these dates will be very familiar to many of you, but I'll just just mention that what we're planning is to celebrate. So we're acknowledging both the announcement of the NFSA's creation in Parliament on the 5th of April 1984, and then the opening of the NFSA at Acton on 3rd of October 1984. So that's a good 7 months. So we're really looking at the festival of the 40th. And so we're planning now for activities to happen over that time. What we would like to do is coordinate all of our channels and all of our activities across the NFSA across 3 key messages, which really link to the strategic plan that Patrick's just talked you through. And it's really just using the 40th as an opportunity to sort of bed down or feed into the delivery of some of those goals. So main messages that we're looking at are the fact that NFSA is a digital institution for the 21st century, and that's really pushing into our collecting activity around games and more complex media, as well as use of AI and some of the tools we're using to both manage the collection and also help to share it and preserve it. Our editorial voice that Patrick spoke about, so the fact that we are very unique, we have an idiosyncratic voice, we have a very unique collection, and that we reflect contemporary Australia. And finally, the sense of intellectual curiosity, that we are a leader in the sector, that we have, an interest. So it's around sort of delving into the collection and really having a curiosity and innovation around how we're looking at it and using it. So we're looking at the moment, and this is still in formation, but 5 streams of activity. The first is around the place-based, the refreshing of Acton that Patrick spoke to you about. So that's something that will be ready by the 5th of April next year, with, you know, library, the front room, the foyer, the South Gallery refreshed and opened, ready for the anniversary. And alongside that is refreshing our public programs and the media literacy and education work that Patrick mentioned. The second stream is about the editorial activity, the sharing of the collection. So we'll look at, we won't have time to completely rebuild our website before the anniversary, but we will be doing a web refresh, and we'll have a space to be able to share material that relates to the 40th. And we'll also look at things like a screening program. You know, we obviously have a long catalogue of restores titles that we would love to celebrate and share. So we're working on what that might look like. Third stream is around thought leadership, and that's really delving into that professional voice of the NFSA. So we have a number of conferences along the year, and then leading up to, we're looking at the moment having a conference on digital and AI that we can talk more about in coming months, once we've confirmed that that will be sort of towards the end of the year. And we would like to have a publication coming out of that speaks about the history and the future of AV archiving. Series of events, you know, we are looking at whether we would love to ideally have a gala that replicates the opening of Acton. Obviously, there's a lot of work in that, and that would hinge on getting either our minister or, you know, we'd love to have our PM there, but we're looking at what's possible. And then finally, corporate profiling. And we'll be working on building that work messaging to government, as well as our ongoing messaging about our role and who we are. So that's just in a nutshell. Once we have a more formed program, we'll come back to you.
Good. Thank you, Jackie. Well, look, I think we have some time now for questions to Patrick or Jackie.
Can I ask a question, Ray?
Darryl, yep.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks so much for your presentation. I'm a member of the Melbourne Committee of the National Friends of the Film and Sound Archive, but also I'm a documentary film producer. I'm just a little bit concerned about your idea for an editorial voice. I'm just wondering, because my main issue with the National Film and Sound Archive is how difficult it is for documentary filmmakers to get material out of it, how expensive it is. Now we know what's in there often, and we really want to use it, and we can't because the fees are so expensive. So on the one hand, we have an issue where the documentary community can't get that material because of the cost. And then on the other hand, you're saying you're going to start producing documentary material out of the archive in some form. Now, on the face of it, I'm really happy that you're thinking of doing that, because I think it's really important that people get to see what's in the National Film and Sound Archive. But on the other hand, it feels really weird that the people who've been trying to do that for many years are sort of stymied. Have you got anything to say about that?
Yeah, we're not producing documentary films. We're not producing TV series. We're producing short form content, which we're kind of doing now for web channels, just not particularly well. So we're not going into competition with the professional screen sector. And as I said, ENA is a very particular organization, and it has 100 people in that department. Also, because there is so much more public money in the production of content in France, by the time the material gets into the archive can essentially do with it what it wants. Whereas you would be aware that less than 10% of the collection is actually under the control of NFSA. So we can't use the material in the same way that other people can't use material because of the rights situations, or we can if we pay for it. In terms of the difficulty, we're working on systems now to make it easier. We understand that it's difficult. And in terms of the expense, we're reviewing the pricing now, as I've said, and we're looking at what is normal and regular for peer institutions around the world. And we're looking at, we actually, in some years, we actually give away free of charge to practitioners more than we charge in fees. So there are only some makers that are actually subject to fees, and it's typically projects that are being produced commercially or are expected to have a commercial life. A lot of other works are, the fees are waived for in any case, but it's clunky. The core of the project was invented for a different generation, and then it's been bolted onto over a period of time. And so it's just dawned on us that it's not a case of changing the pricing. It's a change of, is there pricing for certain types of users? How do we make it easier for people to find stuff and get hold of it? It's just not going to be an immediate solve. Since I've been in the job, it's a complaint that's frequently made, but as I've looked into it, it's not just something of making it cheaper or taking prices off. There's a whole range of problems coalescing around that we want to take away.
If I could maybe just amplify that a bit, I think there are two issues when a documentary maker comes to the archive for footage. One is the copyright owner of the footage will charge whatever they want to, and that's out of the archive's hands. But the archive also imposes its own fees, and I guess that's where there's some flexibility about what the archive can choose to do.
That's correct.
Yep.
And I'm relatively, well-educated and professionally savvy. And when I look through the tables of different types of fees payable by some and not others, and on a per second basis, but then with a bulk discount over X minutes, it's kind of mind-blowing. It's not making it easy. So we're really looking at what is normal or advanced practice in peer institutions. Some complaints about this we've received through MPs, so it is an issue that we do respond to. But I kind of want to get it right. I just think another band-aid at this point in time is just kind of pushing the problem down the road.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Other questions? And I know that I see that Michael Organ has had to log out. I think he's traveling today, so it's he'd warned me that he might be able to stay the whole distance. But Michael, I think Michael put in a question, and we sent it to you, Patrick, ahead of today. I'll read out what he's written. As a professional archivist, my philosophy was to preserve, protect, and promote. It is in the latter area that I feel the NFSA has performed poorly. For example, in recently researching Australia's greatest film of the silent era, For the Term of His Natural Life, 1927, which was reconstructed and restored back in 1981, I was not able to view a copy. I believe that in 2023 it should be publicly available, along with other iconic Australian film and AV material, on streaming services such as ABC iView, SBS, Canopy, or even Netflix, for educational and fandom purposes. I welcome your strategic directions 2022-25, and especially the elements around increased digitisation, improvements in discoverability, and public exposure of the holdings to support research and community engagement. However, I would ask, is there an action plan 2022-25 setting up benchmarks, timelines, and metrics to assess performance of the document?
The document itself, no, because it's a directional document. The actual plans and KPIs and deadlines come through the corporate plan, which is something that is submitted to government and is published publicly. So we haven't actually issued our first corporate plan under the new strategic directions document. The other thing about the strategic directions document, as I said, is when we released it, we were still quite broke. So we're still processing how we're going to get the rubber on the road with the new funding uplift, and that will change the order of things that we thought we'd be able to do, and in some cases the magnitude. So I agree with the statement of problem, which is things aren't available enough, and there are increasingly ways to do that. They're not easily findable enough. Completely agree with all of that. In terms of a budgeted public series of deadlines around particular actions, not yet, but that's now in development with the corporate plan. But I will say that we are launching a new initiative called NFSA Player in late June. And NFSA Player is our first toe in the water for streaming. And previous managements have talked about streaming, and the idea has been epic amounts of investment in a bespoke streaming platform and everything. But what we're doing is we're licensing an off-the-shelf product, which is what MythPlay uses and Acme uses. A number of institutions around the world are using this streaming service called Shift 72, where you can build a really slick looking bundle and launch it quite quickly and quite cost effectively. So the first collection we're releasing on NFSA Player is called Bawinja, and it's the Dharawal word for remember, and it's a package of 17 pieces of material curated by Jill Moody, which are being released in time for NAIDOC. So this is our first toe in the water. You know, BFI has BFI Player, ENA has Cinémathèque Française has a streaming platform. A lot of our major institutions have streaming platforms where you can not only see clips of stuff on the website, but you can sit down and watch an iconic film from the collection, and you can't do that with us at the moment. And I think that is a major gap. We did have a DVD shop which did quite well, but no one, you know, the demand, the relevance and the demand for that went off a cliff. That's been replaced by streaming, but we haven't actually worked out how to replace that with streaming yet. So we're starting that process this year.
Good. Other questions?
Can you see Lisa has her hand up, Ray?
Yep. Lisa?
Hi, Patrick. My name's Lisa Smith and I'm on the Melbourne committee. Thanks for your presentation, which I found really insightful and also quite exciting in terms of the possibilities for the future. I just wanted to, it's just a comment really, that having used the MIF player, for instance, in, you know, virtually attending the film festival in Melbourne, which I always attended a lot of in person, but of course, over the last few years, a whole lot of that has changed. And the experience of that player, I thought, was absolutely fabulous, really immersive, super high quality, and entirely kind of, you know, you're in that moment in a way that I thought replicated the cinematic in-person experience incredibly effectively. So if you're using the same platform, I think you'll find it great. You know, I mean, you've probably had those same experiences yourself, I'm sure. So yeah, I really think that's a great move. Thank you. So just a comment.
Well, thank you for saying that, because it's been around for a while, so it's pretty thoroughly optimized and people are familiar with how to use it. And so that's great to hear that you are already using it. The other thing that we're interested in with streaming is that for the 17 titles on the package, we've had to acquire those rights. And I think for a single title, it's $4.99, and for all 17, it's $19.99. So it's a very affordable price range. But what we're hoping is that in terms of whole content, like whole titles that are still, you know, on release, or that, you know, the rights are still current, we think that we've got a role in supporting the industry in supporting revenue generation for items in the collection. So a lot of the collections we have in the item, a lot of items we have in the collection are everywhere. You know, you can see a terrible version on YouTube, or maybe iView has it kind of 17 menu pages down. But we actually think there's a whole amount of Australian content that gets a quick cinema release, is seen at festivals, goes onto iView, and then disappears from view. And so we think we've got a role in continuing to spotlight and resurface really, you know, Australian films that people would love to see. And in so doing, you know, boost the revenue tail on those projects as well.
Sue. You're muted, Sue.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sue Terry, Secretary of the Friends of the NFSA. Thanks, Patrick. That was really great. It was really nice to hear the plans for the future, and they do sound exciting. As someone who came partly from the cataloguing background at the NFSA, I was interested in what you had to say about AI and the possibilities it has. And one of the things that I love about the NLA is the ability to search Trove, for example, and find information. And I know the NFSA has so much information in there that the general public want to know, you know, was my father on academic and that sort of stuff. And I'm wondering whether these new developments will help the public with those sorts of more personal inquiries, as well as you know, seeing the collection as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And the kind of miracle moment there is called speech to text. so a lot of books are text, so you can search text, but
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
AV is linear and spoken. So, you know, in the old days, you'd have to listen to 100 hours of oral history to find a name. But now you can transcribe, the computers can transcribe all of that material, and then you do a very simple text search. So that's what we're trialing internally. We will be releasing a public version. We're calling it Search as a Product is the internal code name. We just want to make sure it's right before it gets out there. But already, I mean, particularly with oral history, like oral history has been one of the most difficult forms to work with, but contains the most, you know, potential in some ways in terms of learning. And I tried to trick it once by writing in Michael Hutchins, but misspelling it, and it found a reference in a 15-year-old oral history to Michael Hutchins, but also misspelled. So it's intelligent enough to kind of know, you know, what you're after. And then the other thing with AI is you can train it. So over a period of time, once you come up with those mistakes, the user can then correct it. So we think that this Search as a Product project will, you know, really massively increase public interest and usage of the collection.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Oh, Liz is sharing a screen.
Yeah. I don't know whether Liz meant to do all this.
Yeah.
There should be a button called Stop Share somewhere.
I don't think she realizes.
Okay. Yeah.
She's showing us all her work.
Oh, Liz, I can't hear what you're saying.
Can Chris do anything? Chris, are you able to?
You're able to. Chris, you're muted too. Liz.
While I've got the floor, I want to say that the sharing of the screen was inadvertent.
All right.
And actually, Patrick, I had a couple of questions marked on page 13. One was the First Nations first, the new focus on returning content, but you actually presented a half of, I think you presented the North Star, the South Star, and I think that's answered now. But would you like to say anything else? But I've also marked the final passage on page 14.
Not sure I can remember what the final passage on page 14 is. Is that of the strategic directions document or my presentation
it's called,
today?
Facilitating access to our unique collection for use in exhibitions, programs, and teaching and research. And what my question was, who will pay?
Jackie might need to help me on this one. My understanding is that researchers can access the material without paying. Sometimes, if an exhibition, if a partner museum is mounting an exhibition and they want items from our collection, they will have to pay the rights holder for that. But Jackie, I'm not sure what is normal in between institutions. Like presumably when we put on something like Australians in Hollywood, you know, we're on the paying end, not the payer end. Do you know what's normal for exchange between institutions?
Well, it depends, because obviously FIAF members, there's a different arrangement, but generally, I mean, this goes to the point that Daryl had before, that we do have handling fees for all of it, you know, rights arrangements and licensing aside. One of the things that Patrick mentioned is we are looking at our fees across the board, and those handling fees were set many, many years ago. And I think we need to do an assessment of how they reflect the cost and what we're trying to get out of those, those sort of loans of collection material, including for exhibition, where it's, between federal institutions, we generally have arrangements in place, and we sometimes have that in place as well with other institutions. So ACME, for example, we have an agreement. We have quite a lot of content in their new, I forget the name of it, their permanent exhibition in their fabulous new building. But that's with acknowledgement of the NFSA beyond what we would normally require. So it's a much more sort of elevated profile. But it's something we want to look at over the next year in terms of our fees across the board. Does that answer your question, Liz?
Thank you very much, Jackie. And I'm the newest member of the Melbourne Friends committee, but I want to say how I enjoyed your presentation, Patrick, and thanks very much. And
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Other questions? Bruce, please. You're muted, Bruce. Yeah, good.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I thought it was a fabulous talk and really very, very exciting. And I was really encouraged by a lot of it. So thanks. And also, Jackie, your content about the 40th was really good too. I'm on the Melbourne committee as well. And as a Melbourne resident who's also visited the centre a couple of times at Acton, I very much feel the absence of a physical presence in Melbourne. I believe that there is an office in Melbourne, but it's not really accessible. And so I was excited to hear what you say, and I acknowledge that it's some way into the future. It's not a top priority about having more of a presence outside of Canberra. I'd really be interested to hear how you envisage that happening. Like, for example, I'm on the mailing list for the National Film and Sound Archive, and I get these emails about various events and screenings and this, that, and the other, and I think, oh, bugger, and so is it that some of that stuff will be, would there be a more accessible office in places like Melbourne and other capitals, or would it be through things like ACME or other partner institutions, or is this all still totally up in the air at the moment?
It's up in the air. Physical presence is really expensive, and as I touched on before, the previous CEO actually shut public programs in Canberra as well. It costs a lot of money to keep those programs going, and so everything that we spend money on, we're very aware that $1 spent here is $1 not spent there. So physical presence could be a long road back, which is why it's in the South Star projects. With the Melbourne office, when I first arrived, there's a great team working in Melbourne, and a lot of them have very long tenure, so they're very valuable workers. But there's been this checkered history of, there was an office that was next to a freeway being built, and then the lease finished, and then they moved in with someone else, and that was great, but then that got terminated. And so they've been moving around a lot, and the sublet from ACME wasn't great for anyone. And so we've actually spoken to the ABC, and the Melbourne office is now located in ABC South Bank, where they're now co-located with another national AV institution. So they're better placed to have conversations with fellow practitioners in Victoria. In terms of recording oral histories and having volunteers come into the office, it's now a secure environment, but it's a much more useful environment. And so getting that right was the first part, like just getting the Melbourne workforce kind of happy and settled and putting them in a better location. The institution, I think another former CEO once told me that the NFSA, people don't often talk about the fact that the NFSA collection is one of the most viewed, accessed, and valuable of any national collection. People just don't know that because it is in other institutions all the time. We feature, when we find things like, the Easy Beats premiere on Top of the Pops in the UK in the 60s, that gets massive media coverage, which drives traffic to the website. We've got social channels, YouTube, and the licensing program. So we're on television and in feature films and documentaries and stuff all the time. So the collection itself is, you can see the collection at ACME at the moment. You can see it around the country in different institutions, but not all of it is branded by us. So we want to make sure the collection is relevant and used around the country is the first thing. And then the second thing is to kind of do more of our own programs so that we're building more of a community around us as a brand. There's been a change in leadership at ACME. For a long period of time, they were kind of very much programming all our own spaces. We've had initial conversations with them about, could we hire a space in ACME and actually have a National Film and Sound Archive program at ACME, as opposed to it being an ACME program using National Film and Sound Archive material? And then could we have a Friends talk based around that? So these are some of the ideas that could be quick wins coming up. But we, you know, our main, probably nothing too exciting and brilliant is going to be that tangible for another year, I would say, because the first thing we've really got to do is work out how to hire more people. And in the AV curatorial space, they're not queues of people waiting to get in the door. So on the plus side, it means that the incredible, committed, knowledgeable, really well networked workforce that we have will all get new opportunities inside the organization. And then that will then create an exciting new problem, which is how we attract and develop the next generation of AV archival and cultural practitioners. So there are a couple of things that we're going to get right kind of, you know, inside the shell before there'll be too many of the tangible, visible things that people are craving. And they're all things that we're craving as well, but we're very, I don't want to make this place as great as the current team can make it, and then when we leave, it's not sustainable. We're very consciously trying to design something that doesn't all get switched off again when the government changes, or when there are key personnel changes. And if you think about Michael Levenstein, Jan Muller, me, and then Meg acting for a year and Nancy acting for nearly a year, NFSA had pretty much 5 CEOs in 5 years as I walked in the door. So there's a lot of just tidying up and rationalizing and calming everyone down and getting, the new strategic alignment document that we're talking about today. I feel that the majority of staff have breathed a sigh of relief. We now all understand what we're doing and why. And now we've got the increased money. There's a new executive leadership team. I feel like the next 5 years, we should really actually start to address some of these things, but it just won't be immediate.
Andrew, you're muted, Andrew.
No, I'm not. Thank you very much, Patrick, and also Jackie. That was very stimulating to hear what you had to say, and I really appreciate that, and thank you. One of the concerns I have is as a film historian, not particularly active in the last few decades, but very active early on, and maintaining an interest in our cinema history. My concern is that there are no tertiary level courses in Australian cinema history. And I think that is a double-edged problem for the NFSA. In terms of getting staff who are aware of the relative importance of items in the collection, particularly say from the first 30 years of cinema, or even the first 50 years of cinema. That's one, and I think in-service training is going to be really important, because the educational institution is not going to be feeding you people with that knowledge. Secondly, if you're going to make very practical choices in terms of developing public programs and public collection resources, there needs to be that knowledge of cinema history to guide you in sensible priorities. And I think that it's only with a knowledge of what has happened in the past that the right decisions will be, the most useful decisions will be made if the NFSA is to be a leader, not a follower. If you're going to be a follower, then you just ignore the first 30 or 50 years. And I don't think anyone wants that to happen. So I think that I'd be really keen to see if there's any way that the NFSA can actually broker the idea of more educational institutions servicing our cinema history, providing courses and programs, you know, particularly with doctoral studies and so on. I think that really needs to happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. We agree with that, and I think we're having a range of new conversations with different academic institutions at the moment. Those things in the past have just been so time consuming and not an immediate kind of an immediate term threat, but I think we are trying to lift the horizon a little bit. So I think that's a really useful point to make. Thank you.
Good.
I just also, like, I've heard of 40,000 Horsemen, but I've never seen it. Like, you know, this comes back to streaming and stuff. Like, you not only want to educate people about these milestones, but you want to be able to let people see them. And people know that we've got them, but we can't show them. We haven't worked out ways of making it easier to show them to people. So I think the education and the interest are kind of self-supporting cycles as well.
Yeah.
Other questions? Patrick, Sue, go on. Yes, sir.
Oh, Liz has got her hand up.
Liz, sorry, Liz didn't see you.
Oh, Lisa, sorry.
Lisa, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. Just to add to that discussion point around the education programs and also the access going together, having been myself someone who did in an honours arts degree since many decades ago at Melbourne Uni, when they had as part of the sort of fine arts history, you could specialise in cinema history, which I did. But I remember, I mean, at that time, yes, there was a course. So you did the study at university around that specialisation as part of a broader degree structure. But of course, the challenge then was actually access. So I remember doing my, honours thesis in surrealist film and having to chase down film screenings all over the Astor and all kinds of places just when they popped up, and the difficulty of accessing what then, of course, was going to be in analogue form. So I think, that it's such a good comment around it's not only about the educational ability, I guess, to specialise in particular broader degree structures, but also it's about that online access to material, because, in the past, of course, it was nightmarishly difficult, and now there's such a great opportunity to make it so much easier. So, if there's that keenness and interest and developed through an educational specialisation, then making that access really without barriers, would just be a fantastic kind of double effect, double impact, I suppose. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. Other questions? One question that I would ask, Patrick, is the digitisation program is well underway. What are the priorities? What's actually being digitised first?
The digitisation itself still isn't quite underway, because the first part of the 4-year program was a major procurement exercise. So in order to digitise more, we need more machines. So there's been a lot of research in what machines we need. Some of them are in the country, some of them aren't. Also, to install film scanners, which are gigantic, we've had to remodel part of the building to accommodate the film scanners. And we've also been hiring and training new people to do the scanning. So we have started doing some scanning with partner organisations, but the bulk of that will happen towards the end of the project. We're still in a kind of a readiness phase. Jackie might be able to talk more about what's being digitised. The intention of the project was to bring forward the digitisation of at-risk magnetic formats that institutions otherwise had no resources or plans to digitize. So it's not taking work out of the market. These are backlogs of things that people were worried about, but they had no ability to solve. most of the, as you would expect, most of the items to be digitized are in our own collection, and Jackie might be able to talk about how they were prioritized.
Jackie?
Sorry, and I was just madly looking, I'm on one screen on my laptop. We have our digitisation team since we received the 42 million, and we've been massively upscaling our video digitisation. They've started to do a monthly digitisation highlights reel or sort of blog for the institution, which is really helpful in having a look. And I thought I wanted to give you a bit of, had I been more prepared, a bit of very specific colour from that. So I have two thoughts. One thing is I would like to, I know we're in discussions at the moment with Jill around a future similar Sunday seminar for the Friends on the Restores program. And perhaps what I could do is build in a very detailed sort of, reel around what we've digitised recently. But as Patrick said, video and audio, we have been focused on generally collection material that is deteriorating very quickly, or some of the larger broadcast acquisitions we've had where we have large numbers of tapes and we've been able to get through them very quickly. With film, the team, because we've had limited capacity at the moment, and particularly as we have been moving our film scanner so that we can actually refit the film scanning space, the film digitisation space, we've been focused on material that's required for a lot of the access work or some of our editorial work. But what I'll do is actually give you a much more detailed presentation at when we talk about Restores.
Oh, good. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, one other thing in conversation with Rebecca at CPARBA, she mentioned that you're probably going to be able to extend the nitrate vault as well with the extra money. Can you give us any info on that?
Patrick?
So there's a little bit of money to enhance the current vault, and we're still talking to the government about an additional grant to expand the nitrate vault. The nitrate vault already houses collection items from a number of different institutions, and I think it's entirely reasonable that NFSA is the national nitrate centre. It's another one of those examples where at a point in history there was interest and investment in the institution that hasn't been maintained. So the nitrate vault was a great fit for purpose facility in its day, but it now needs some critical upgrades which are funded over the next 2 years. But we're still working with government, and they're receptive to this, about additional funding to really upgrade and increase the capacity of nitrate.
Good.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick. Look, we're getting towards our 90-minute limit. It's just 2 minutes to go. So I guess this is a good point to, unless there are any last-minute questions, to call a halt. Thank you, Patrick, very much for a very stimulating presentation. We're glad to know what things that are going on, and you too, Jackie, for just for the other things you've added. So thank you, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us, and thanks for your interest in the institution over many years, obviously, and all your support and knowledge that you bring to the conversation. And that was really, I love talking about it because I love hearing the questions and the comments that come back, because they all help our thinking progress. So thank you very much to everyone.
Okay, so thank you all for attending today, and good afternoon.
See you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.